BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
The Culture Scene with Nicola Meehan
From BBC Radio Scotland.
Thanks for joining us here on the Culture Scene podcast with me, Nicola Meehan, for another weekly roundup of arts and entertainment highlights. This week, Blondie co-founder and guitarist Chris Stein talks about his memoir, Under a Rock, and touches on the influence of the Bay City Rollers and of West Side Story. And Blondie's Parallel Lines. I think that says everything about my musical obsessions through the years.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
What a time
totally.
to be alive, yeah.
Yeah, so Chris Stein, we mentioned beforehand, of course, that you were once accosted by Debbie Harry in a mini kilt.
And I got Clem Burke's drumsticks that night as well.
None of those things are mentioned in Chris Stein's new memoir, Under a Rock.
Unbelievable.
I think I'm going to have a word with him. As it happens, I did.
Did you?
Earlier
Seamless,
this
Nicola
week.
Meehan, seamless.
He didn't mention that he was in a mini kilt at Hogmanay when Grant Stott was presenting that year. But yeah, Under a Rock, he has just published it. I spoke to him about it earlier this week and he reflected on some key musical moments, including the Christmas, aged 12, that he first got an electric guitar.
I didn't have a clue. It took me a year or more just to master the basics, just sitting around myself. No one ever showed me how to deal with it. I started out with my thumb for quite a while. It's hard to explain.
Of course, eventually you say that there's a milestone because you learn, I think it's the Animals, House of the Rising
Sun.
And the lovely thing about that is the impossible suddenly becomes possible. You've done it.
Yeah, things move forwards constantly. I developed my own weird style over the years.
Tell us more about what you were listening to back then, because you were going to see jazz gigs, you loved Dylan. There was so much feeding into sort of your young musical mind, wasn't there?
I was kind of a folky before I was into the rock movement. That was kind of the hip thing. If you were like a young hippie, was the folk music movement. And as I say in the book, when the Beatles first arrived, I thought, oh, these guys are a little too commercial for me. I thought of them the way I think of Justin Bieber now. But then when I finally got the record, I was totally pulled in.
The idea of music was obviously fascinating to you, but it was movies, you say, really, wasn't it, that even got you into music itself, movies and film and that visual
soundtracks.
aspect.
What's really funny is now in later life, I rarely see film scores that I think work. There's so much, I feel like film music is very manipulative. And I don't know if it was my younger days that I was a sucker for that, or if there were better film scores going on, but I played the heck out of the Lawrence of Arabia soundtrack at home when I was a kid. So what can I say?
Perhaps it's also just the scarcity of it, or the sparsity of things, the event, the ceremony of going to the cinema, the few records that we had back then, right? You have to play them over and over and over.
Yeah, I try to explain what a big phenomenon West Side Story was in America. It was huge. It was knocked out by the British invasion bands as a phenomenon, but it was almost equally as big. It's hard for people to comprehend that nowadays.
1973, is it? You walk into this gig. It's the first gig by a band called the Stilettos. And at the same night, I think you meet Debbie Harry for the first time. And there are these moments throughout the book that just seem to be, at the time, it's just an evening. You're just going out, but they have such a musical and personal impact on you. We never really know when those moments are going to hit, do we? Yeah. It's always, as they say in the book, the future cast its shadow backwards, as it were. So it just worked out. So take us into that venue that night. Paint a picture of it for us.
It was just one of those little bars in Midtown. I think it was 24th Street or 26th Street. Just this long, narrow bar. And then there was a sort of larger opening in the rear. And they had I think the girls were on a pool table, but I'm not that they had a board on top of, and the band was off to the side. So they had rotating musicians. They didn't have a full-on band. And I joined shortly thereafter. We'll gloss over the fact that after the Stilettos, you were called Angel and the Snake for a little bit, because that's what you do in the book. It's a brief moment. But we fooled around with other names just for a couple of weeks before Debbie came up with the Blondie thing. And she'd just gone out in the street and people had been telling us. She just had bleached her hair for the first time since I knew her anyway. She may have done it prior. She had like a kind of twiggy haircut at that point. And then she said, a guy yelled, "Hey, Blondie," at me. And oddly, the comic book people never bothered us for all these years. I've never heard from them. I think Debbie met Penny Singleton, who played it in the movie. There was a series of Blondie movies, too. They never complained. I was always pleased by that.
The personnel changed a little bit in the early days, and you eventually found your drummer, Clem Burke, thanks to an advert in the Village Voice. You have the text of the advert in the book, which is just lovely. But also, I'm a Scottish person. I'm always looking for Scottish connections. And I love that you say Clem came, he was the last guy we saw, and he loved the Bay City Rollers.
Yeah, yes, he was the big Rollers. I mean, his hairdo is kind of inspired by, mod/Rollers, if you know that kind of bouffant thing he has.
Now, you mention among your UK dates and Scottish gigs that you play, you meet your UK PR, Alan Edwards. Now, I spoke to Alan maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about his memoir, because he's got a book out too.
I was there, I believe it's called. Alan was great. He still is great. He must have a crazy amount of stories.
But he told me a really lovely one. He said that he got the job as your PR guy by basically turning up at your dressing room door and offering his services. But he also said that what was lovely was Debbie Harry always made sure that he had a hot dinner, and that you guys were basically like his surrogate family. You really took him under your wing.
Yeah, Alan's great. He's one of the nicest people I know in showbiz, and supremely competent at what he does.
You come over here. Denis is then a massive hit in the UK, and you come on Top of the Pops. Now, of course, Top of the Pops for us over here has been an institution forever, so we kind of get the fact that it's huge, but it's a bit weird. But what was that like, that coming over from the States and having to mime and re-record the song?
Oh, yeah, that was absolutely bizarre, and it's really hard to explain. And I would just suggest people read the book. One had to undergo this weird ritual of re-recording the track to lip sync on Top of the Pops. But it was just weird. Interesting nonetheless. We had Dick Clark in the States, but it wasn't, I don't know if it had the same massive national impact. Maybe. I remember seeing the Four Seasons on Dick Clark when I was a kid. And those guys were huge. Yeah.
And those moments, even if you're a kid, they can be life-changing. They can just show you something else that's another way of living. Apart from the stories about your own life and your family life and the way the band got together within the book, I love that there are sort of stories of the songs as well. So I kind of knew a little bit about Heart of Glass, and I knew it had maybe been called the disco song before, but I love that it kind of makes a recurring appearance as the book progresses. So it's a demo, isn't it, that was influenced by the Hughes Corporation's Rock the Boat.
Yeah, Hughes Corporation. Yeah, it was kind of a Rock the Boat Baby reference in the chorus a little bit. I don't know if anybody would get that unless I said it. It went through a bunch of stylistic changes as time went on. And then it was definitely driven by the technology. When we got the synthesizer that linked to the drum machine, that was a big deal in forming it.
It's also interesting because it shows you that a song will find its life in its own time. So when it was demoed, no one really showed any interest. And then fast forward a few chapters, and I think you're in Europe at the time, and the boss of your American record label comes over to say, you're number one in the States.
It was Mike. It was Chapman, our producer.
Right, yeah.
Who is the George Martin of Blondie. Mike came over to tell us we got to number one in the States. It was a great moment.
Yeah, it's lovely actually, because when you speak about Mike Chapman and that relationship you have with him, you say there was a point at which ABBA were maybe going to produce an album, or Phil Spector was, but Mike just felt like so much the man for the job every time.
We dodged the bullet by not working with Phil, because God knows where that would have gone. But we were just really lucky to hook up with Mike. He was great. It was a just perfect kind of relationship.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you say later on in the book is that you think that Blondie have accrued, if you like, credibility over years. So when you're writing it and you're looking back, you realise that that's something that's built up. And I wonder if part of that is the fact that, yes, you had a break, but you came back and you had new music. You had such a strong series of albums since the kind of the quieter years, if you like. Do you think the fact that you kept making new music is one of the reasons why people have kept coming to Blondie and discovering them at different points?
Maybe. We have a record in the can now. I guess maybe early next year. I'm not sure when it'll get out there.
So it's a case of looking forward as well as looking back.
Yeah, I just enjoy recording, making music, all that stuff. I have to, when I'm finished with the book-related stuff, I have to get back to it.
There you go, the lovely Chris Stein talking to me earlier this week. A new Blondie album, Grant. That's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he touched on it there, as did you, just on that break that they took, and then they came back in the early 2000s and just stormed it straight back to number one with Maria. And it was like, you know, Blondie can go away. Oh, there's not many bands that can do that, especially from that era, the late sort of 70s. And to disappear as they did, solo projects and whatever, throughout the sort of late 80s, 90s, and then decide to come back and smash it.
I know, absolutely huge second act, chart hits, massive sold out tours. They got to share a stage with Grant Stott.
Yes.
That's probably why they reunited. They were like, if we get the band back to Debbie, because Chris Stein phones her one day and basically suggests it, right? And I think it was probably like, just imagine this. Edinburgh, you in a mini kilt. Grant Stott. One of the things I didn't get round to talking to Chris Stein about is a brilliant story in the book. So around about the time of American Gigolo, they write Call Me, of course, absolutely brilliant tune. And Chris Stein takes Richard Gere guitar shopping.
Guitar shopping, right?
Richard
Does Richard Gere play guitar?
Well, apparently he quite fancied the idea. So, of course, Chris Stein takes him into some guitar shop in New York and says, you know, this guy's going to be huge. And he was like, I don't think they were very impressed. They just gave him a Stratocaster. I don't know what they were expecting.
Gosh. And
Richard Gere.
Where's his guitar career gone since?
It might be about to emerge. Yeah. If you promised him a gig, I think that's all it takes.
Funnily enough, my party piece involves Blondie. My party piece is...
I thought you were going to say it involves Richard Gere. That would have been quite different.
No. My party piece involves Blondie because I can air drum the entire length of Heart of Glass.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Or the disco song as it was known prior.
The disco song as it was, yes. So all the fills that claimed it, and that's just used. And I mastered it in the basement, Broughton Street, one night. Suddenly realised, hang on, I can do this.
I did wonder. I love that you have a party piece.
Yeah, everyone's got a party piece. What's your party piece?
I don't have one.
You must have a party piece.
I do not have one.
Okay,
I'm no fun.
So let's picture the scene. We're on a works night out. We're all gathered round in producer Emily's flat.
Yes, and, Emily, we're coming.
We've had a couple of bottles of wine, some crisps of a spicy nature, and everyone's got up and done a bit, and everyone's now looking at Nicola as the host of the podcast. No. Right, Nicola, come on, what do you do? Do you get up and sing? Do you get up and tell a joke? Do you tell a story or recite a poem?
I hate jokes and I can't sing.
Dear listener, I'm trying very hard here.
And I'm not very good at telling a story. I'm not even very good at getting a story started, let alone finished.
To be fair, I do know you're not a great fan of the spotlight. You're not a great fan of standing up in front of people.
No, I'm very, very, very happy to engage with everyone else's party pieces. And I think air drumming is an absolutely righteous pursuit. Yeah. And Heart of Glass is a fine song as well. Yeah, so you've got to read all about that. That's Chris Stein's memoir. I've had my head buried in various other music books this week. Okay, that's all for this week. I've been Nicola Meehan, Grant Stott.
I've been him too.
Can you do some air drumming just as I do my little outro, right? Yeah, it's so cool. You can hear the bangles and everything. Anyway, thank you wherever you are listening, tuning in. And if you make sure you subscribe, and make sure you subscribe to The Culture Scene on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss new episodes every Friday.